'Twas the night before Christmas, and deep in the house a creature was stirring, ready to pounce. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, whilst phantom footsteps ascended the stair. The children were nestled, all snug in their beds, but a dark shadow figure loomed over their heads. And Mama in her kerchief, and I in my cap, were about to be woken by one ghostly rap.
I am Lil.
And I'm Fitz, and welcome to the Not Once VS Christmas special.
Hello, lovely listeners, festive greetings and merry mince pies. I do hope you are all having a wonderful Yuletide season. We are officially past the shortest day of the year now. The winter solstice has been and gone. Those of you who are eagerly awaiting the return of the sun can rest a little easier knowing that from now on the days will be lengthening. But for those of you who prefer the coziness of the darker half of the year, there are still plenty of winter evenings to enjoy around the fire yet. But whichever camp you fall in, I'm sure we can all agree that one of the best ways to while away the long winter nights is to gather together for some chillingly good ghost stories. And we have plenty of those for you today. So, without further ado, what have we got coming up on today's episode, Fitz?
It's Christmas time, and that means it's time for the Not Once VS Christmas special. This episode, we're starting off with a paranormal blooper. We have listeners' paranormal experiences from Niall, Liz and Conky. We're taking to the skies as we share some fascinating tales of aviation ghosts. And we couldn't possibly forget the terribly cheesy KOFY Christmas quiz.
But before we get stuck into all of that, we want to say a huge thank you to our latest patrons.
Deborah Ware,
Laura Beth,
Jan Jen,
Alan Beardsley,
Katie Thomas,
Kat Smith,
and Alan Cumming.
As always, a huge, heartfelt thank you to all of our supporters, be they old or new. Anybody that's ever given us a like or a subscribe on YouTube, supported us financially, popped a tip in the coffee tip jar, or just told a friend, or sent us a story. All of your support is so very much appreciated. And thank you guys for being here with us for another year of spooky adventures. We have loved having you along for the ride.
And we'll kick off the fun with a paranormal blooper from Al Hassel.
I run Explore Birmingham, a small walking tour company in my hometown. I have a few small group walking tours focusing on local history, including Birmingham's Dark Side walking tour. This tour goes through the atmospheric streets of Birmingham's Jewellery Quarter, telling stories of bodies, hangings, corpses, murders, mysteries, and, of course, a few ghost stories. It's not a ghost tour as such, though, and is rooted in macabre and grim local history. But there are always a few people on the tour who are there for the ghost stories, especially around Halloween. So, Halloween evening just gone, I had a full tour. It's aimed at adults, but I do allow children at parental discretion. And there was one girl on the tour aged around 13. Given the spooky evening, there was an appetite for ghost stories, and I'd emphasised the thinness of the veil to get us all in the mood. Our second stop was down a quiet, dark side street outside a cemetery. It was very atmospheric on a chilly Halloween evening, with the cemetery railings on one side and some Victorian light industrial buildings on the other. I was just beginning my next story, the restless corpse of one of the cemetery's residents, glancing across the group as I warmed to my tale. I had noticed the girl who was at the front had what I can only call a haunted look in her eyes as she stared past me to the Victorian buildings behind. As I continued, my attention was drawn to her once more as, still looking past me, she slowly raised her right arm and waved. Halting my story, I spun around to look behind me to see what or who she had been waving at, but the street was empty. The buildings in darkness, no one seemingly at any window. Falteringly, I turned back to the girl. "What did you see? Who were you waving at?" She burst out laughing, pulling up her sleeve to show me. I was just readjusting my bracelet. We all fell about laughing, and it was a great way of building group camaraderie near the start of the tour, even if I felt a little foolish.
I don't think you should have felt foolish for that.
No, not at all.
Like, if I was on, and admittedly, as you say, not quite a ghost tour, but a kind of spooky, creepy tour, and I saw a little girl in the front row wave to something behind me, yeah, completely excusable. I'm with you on that.
Totally with you. And the tour sounds amazing. If we're up Birmingham Way, we will definitely have to hop on.
Well, they did invite us up, so if we ever get the chance, we will do.
Definitely, we need to check that out. Thank you so much to Al for sending in that amazing paranormal blooper. What a fantastic way to kick off our fun festive episode. And we love hearing your paranormal bloopers. If anybody else has had an experience like that, please do write in and share it with us.
So I think it's time for the KOFY Christmas quiz.
Yes, we start here, people. We start here. So the way it's going to go, if you've not joined in with one of these before, we're each going to ask each other and you, the listeners, a question. And then you're going to have a bit of thinking time. We'll have a story in between before we reveal the answers. Well, we'll first have a bit of a guess each. Probably get it wrong.
I will probably get it wrong. Lil will quite often get it right and I will fail spectacularly.
Sometimes. I'm not feeling confident, but we'll see. But then we will reveal the answer. So keep track of your scores as we go.
So, who wants to go first? Are you going first? Shall I go first?
You can, yeah, you go first.
Okay, well, I'm going to start off with a nice, easy one for you. Or at least
you say that now.
I think it's going to be an easy one.
We'll see.
I'm not that I would be disappointed if you didn't know this, but I'm kind of expecting that you will.
Okay.
So, I know that you're a fan of Ghost Stories at Christmas by M.R. James.
Yes.
Can you tell me what the initials M.R. stand for in M.R. James?
I know one of them, but obviously I'm not going to spoil it for the listeners because they want their thinking time as well. Oh, do I know the second? Right, okay. I'll chew on that for a bit. Are you ready for my first Christmas quiz question?
I am. I'm ready to hear what I will fail at answering.
Well, no, you might not, because...
Are you being nice to me and giving me an easy one as well?
Well, all my questions are on a bit of a theme.
Okay.
We just had our interview with Sarah Clegg, author of The Dead of Winter, and I love that book so much.
It was good.
Even rereading it for the second time, I was just finding new juicy bits to tuck into. I just have such a genuine love for the book that I actually based my Christmas questions. Well, they are inspired by The Dead of Winter. One of them is outright from The Dead of Winter. So if you don't know it, I'll be disappointed.
Oh, this is the thing now. You're going to embarrass me in front of our new friend who was really, really lovely. And if you ask me a question about her book and I can't answer it, I'm going to look horrible.
Well, this one is just inspired by. So
Okay.
you may not
inspired by.
Yeah, you may not know the answer to this, but we'll see. I think you might do. Anyway, so if you listen to that latest episode with Sarah Clegg, you would have heard us talk about the Year Walk, a Scandinavian tradition which participants must leave the house before dawn on Christmas Eve without eating or drinking, talking to anyone, or looking into a fire, all with the aim of seeing the future, or more specifically, seeing the apparitions of those who will die in the village in the coming year. But my question to you is, what similar English tradition involves a nighttime vigil watching for the ghosts of next year's dead?
Oh.
It's quite, I think you will have heard of it. It's a very, when I read about the Year Walk, I was struck by the similarities of this, also a tradition of watching for the ghosts of next year's dead.
Oh, I don't think I know this one. I'm going to have a think.
And if you can't tell me what it's called, could you tell me what date or even what month it takes place in?
Oh, so it's not even at Christmas either?
No. Well, I gave you a clue, but you unwittingly made me give you a clue, but I'll let you off.
Okay, well, I'm going to have a think about that. Do you know what? Annoyingly, I was almost going to ask you a question on this one, because when we were getting prepared to speak to Sarah Clegg, I spoke to a friend of mine and asked him if he could record the pronunciation of the name
of the year walk.
the year walk in Swedish.
Yeah.
And he did. So I was going to ask if you knew the pronunciation, because I did tell you at the
You
time.
did, and I've completely forgotten. So I'm glad you didn't ask that as your question, because I would have failed horribly. Okay, well, I think it might be time for a story. And this one is from Niall.
Once, on a family holiday in Sligo, we were disturbed by a frightening visitation. My parents would pop back to Ireland roughly every year to see family, but one time we took the train to County Sligo in northwest Ireland from Dublin. It's a wonderful journey where you pass mountains and waterfalls. They had rented a little Irish cottage next to fields and a bubbling brook. A joy to explore and taste the clean, fresh air of a summer morn. It was good to be alive. We were having the time of our lives as kids. Not so my mother. For some strange reason, she could hear the scurrying of what seemed like a trapped rat under the floorboards. Eventually and reluctantly, after my mother absolutely insisted, my dad lifted them to see if indeed a rodent had become caught. Nothing. No telltale droppings or chewed wood and paper. The floorboards went back down, though the distinct scratching continued unabated. My mother also kept waking at exactly 4 on the dot in the morning, just at dawn and the first hints of light in the clouds. Then, during one disturbed sleep, it happened. Sitting on a bedroom chair in the corner of the room, she, fully conscious, clearly saw an old woman with straight, well-combed hair held with a clip. She had green eyes, was wearing a cardigan, and she was staring directly at my mother. She was solid. She looked at her quizzingly, almost as if to say, "Why are you here?" My mother tried to wake my dad, but to no avail. He naturally slept on. Wisely, the next morning, they chose not to tell us so as not to scare the hell out of us young kids. But that was not the end of the affair. 2 nights later, my mother again awoke bang on time to discover the old woman, this time sitting on the end of the bed. The expression on her face was the same. "Why are you here?" My mother this time around wisely chose simply to say a short Catholic prayer and then try and go back to sleep. Obviously concerned, my father that very evening ventured to the local pub, and eventually one of the regulars confided that the previous occupant of the cottage had passed away the previous year, and her relatives had only recently taken to renting it out for holidays. Dad asked for a description. It was grey hair, tidy, always wore a cardigan, and quite an austere character. Sure enough, we headed back to London 2 days early.
Thank you so much to Niall for sharing that incredible story. And I know that we always say, oh, you know, ghosts don't have to be scary and it can be a really enriching experience. And whilst I believe that to be true, in this case, I can completely understand why the family left early, because ghosts may be interesting rather than scary. But in this case, this ghost made it very clear that they did not want that family in her house.
Well, you say that, but I kind of read it in a way that was like, why are you here? Like, confusion as opposed to aggression.
Maybe. Yeah, I suppose so. I think it was just the description of the woman in life being quite austere, and that I feel like that came across in the description.
And I can understand it. Like, if I
Mm.
came home and somebody was in my house, I think I would be a little bit confused as well.
It did really remind me, though, of the experience that I had in our haunted shared house, the Victorian Terrace, because that is the look that I got when I saw an apparition across our bedroom who just walked into the room and we locked eyes, and he gave me that exact look. It was more quizzical than austere, but we literally looked into each other's eyes, and this person that wasn't there just had this expression on their face that said, "Why are you here? What are you doing in my room?" Just surprise and shock.
Yeah, so I think maybe ghosts, like you keep telling me spiders are just as scared of you as you are of them.
I stand by it.
If they didn't dive bomb my face, I might believe you.
Is that the ghost or the spiders?
Both. So, thank you, Niall, for that story. But it's time to get back to the Christmas quiz. So, can you... I shall restate it for you, actually.
Yes, please.
I asked you, you're a fan of Ghost Stories at Christmas by M.R. James.
I am.
Can you tell me what the initials M.R. stand for?
And if you're listening at home, scribble down your answers or prepare yourself now. I think I do. I'm pretty sure it's Montague Rhodes James.
Indeed. Gold star. I mean, yeah, you got there's 2, so do I give you 2 points?
Well,
It's 2 names.
maybe, because one of my quiz questions has a bonus point available.
Okay.
So that would even it out.
Okay, yep, you can have 2 points.
Yes.
I'll give you 2 points for that. Even though I
am
think
the
it was a
winner,
reasonably easy
and
question.
I get sprinkles, because sprinkles are for winners. Anyway. So, are you ready with your answer? Shall I restate the question again?
You can feel free to restate it. I'm not entirely sure that I have a correct answer to provide you.
Okay, so in the dead of winter, we heard about the year walk, Scandinavian tradition in which participants watch for the ghosts of the dead in the coming year. But what English tradition is quite similar? But not at Christmas. And can you tell me what date it takes place on?
I'm going to save us both some time and say no and no.
You should know this because it came up in our Whitby research.
I may well know it if you tell me.
Yeah, when I tell you, you'll be like, oh, I can't believe I didn't think of that.
I can, there's sort of things like this that I can think of, like telling the future. Often it's kind of like pre-wedding things where brides can tell if they're going to get married that year.
No, this is specifically a tradition that is about watching for the people in the village that are going to pass away in the next year, watching for a procession of their ghosts.
It's definitely ringing a bell. And it's just the one that's very location specific. It is like a just at Whitby. As opposed to
I think it was more common in Yorkshire, or more commonly spoken about in Yorkshire, but it wasn't just Whitby or Yorkshire. It did, the kind of details of the tradition varied a little between place to place, but it was found, I think, all over.
Yeah, so I think Halloween feels a bit on the nose. Midsummer feels a bit too light.
No, neither of those.
Is it going to be some saint's feast day that I've never heard of?
Yeah, it's going to be a saint's day.
Yeah, I don't know any of those.
Do you give up?
Yeah, I give up.
Okay, it's St. Mark's Eve. It's a tradition called porch watching that takes place on St. Mark's Eve, which is the 24th of April. And it was a custom kept from around the 17th to the 19th century. Watchers would sit in the porch of their local church on St. Mark's Eve, observing total silence between the hour of 11 p.m. and when the clock struck 1. There were varying customs in different areas, as I said. Some watchers had to fast beforehand. Some had to circle around the church before they began their vigil. And some were expected to watch for 3 nights in a row, not just the one, but all expected to see the spirits of all those who would die in the year to come in a procession going into the church.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it does ring a bell, but yeah,
You'd forgotten.
I would never have remembered that.
Oh, a missed point there.
Yep, I get the suspicion that I'm probably not going to do terribly well.
No, some of them are easier. Some of them are easier.
So you're 2-0 up from round one.
There's still time to claw it back. Don't worry.
And I was trying to be fairly easy on you this time, but maybe next year I'll make it more difficult. So, as soon as I asked the first question the first time, I shall start again this time.
Go ahead.
And there are several ghosts, because we're talking about haunted airfields and things today. There are several ghosts that have been reported at Heathrow Airport. And patrons may be on the lookout for something that I'm working on reasonably soon on Heathrow itself, but one of the ghosts that haunts the site of the airport is completely unrelated to aviation, being considerably older than the invention of the aeroplane. They are one of those ghosts that gets around a bit, having been sighted at various locations through the years, and I'll give you a little bit of a hint in the question. Could you tell me which historical horseman haunts Heathrow? Nice bit of alliteration there.
Oh my goodness, I have no idea. And I've read some of your Heathrow research, so I should probably know this, shouldn't I?
I don't think I put this one in the Heathrow research because
sneaky.
It wasn't related to aviation ghosts.
Okay, well, I will have a think, but I think I may miss the point on that one. So, are you ready for my second question?
I am. Bring it on.
I think most of you will have heard of the Welsh wassailing tradition of the Mari Lwyd, involving a type of hobby horse with a real horse skull and glittering but sinister baubles for eyes, which goes around enacting a kind of doorstep rap battle, amongst other things. Some of you may have also heard of a similar horse puppet tradition in Kent called the Hoodening horse, whose head is made from wood rather than a real horse skull. But can you tell me what the May Day celebration involving horse puppets is that comes from Cornwall and still takes place every year in Padstow?
Oh, I think you might have got me again on this one.
You should know this one again. I think I put it in my notes for some work we were doing on the Sarah Clegg episode. So if you don't know it, that's not my fault.
No, dear listeners, you should know that the amount of times I hear you should know better in any given day is a lot.
I tried to pick questions where I thought that you would have seen the information to give you a fighting chance.
I may have seen it. Unfortunately, my brain doesn't retain information incredibly well, but I shall try and scour it whilst we're listening to the next story. And this one comes from Liz.
This story came to me by way of a wonderful social group that I used to be part of for many years. One evening a few years ago, the subject got around to the very strange phenomenon of time slips. Out of maybe 12 people present that evening, I was amazed when 3 of the group admitted to having experienced what they could only describe as a time slip. The first story comes from a gentleman who has sadly passed on. I'll call him Jay. Jay was a young man in the late 1960s and a student at the time. I believe this happened one morning when he was visiting his parents. He recalled coming downstairs and trying to find his keys, and for some reason he thought he might have left the keys in the dining room. So Jay opened the door to the room to see if he'd left them on the table in there. Quite to his amazement, he said he was confronted by a family, a man, woman and 2 children, sitting at a table with what looked like afternoon tea laid out, resplendent with teapot, tea cosy, and sandwiches. Aside from wondering who on earth these strangers were in his parents' house, he noticed that they were all dressed in the fashions of the 1940s, and that the room looked completely different. I don't think Jay actually tried to speak to these people. I believe his first instinct was to slam the door shut and run. However, instead, no doubt after shaking his head and rubbing his eyes, he tentatively opened the dining room door again, but this time he found the room quite empty and returned to its normal 1960s decor and appearance.
And thank you to Liz for sharing that story with us. That was a really good one.
Loved that one. I love a good time slip story. In actual fact, the last story we just told kind of does have a time slippy element to it now I think about it.
Yep, definitely. And Liz very kindly sent us another 2 time slip stories. So
and I believe Niall sent us to come. I believe Niall has sent us another story as well.
Yes, he has more stories. So we've got
really looking forward to those.
Are actually really fun. So I shall look forward to sharing those with you. But this one, when you were talking about after Niall's story, seeing the person that came into our room, I kind of felt a little bit like this. That was almost the other way around.
Yes. Like, just the intrusion, that kind of staring back and wondering what on earth this person is doing here, or this family, the whole family was doing here. I love the little details as well about the teapot and the tea cozy. It conjures up such a cozy scene. But how does that suddenly appear in the tiny room of your parents' house? It's just, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating.
Like, it's one of those where, obviously the sort of mundane explanation is they imagined it or they just saw a coat on the back of a chair. But it's like, okay, maybe if you saw one person and the room wasn't changed, I could almost kind of say that. There's been times when I've jumped at something and misseen it. My brain's kind of filled in a pattern. But to see a whole family, like you say, to have the tea and everything, tea and sandwiches out, for the room to be completely different, like decorated in a different way.
Yeah.
That's not just I mistook a coat for a person.
No.
That's definitely something very, very different.
There's something much deeper going on there. But also, just like you say, it would be easy to explain away as, you saw a coat on the back of the door. But having been in that situation myself, obviously it wasn't quite as detailed of a time slip. But I definitely know deep down inside that I've seen a coat on the back of the door. I've mistaken a lamp for a head before. We've all been there. I've done it lots of times. What I saw when that young lad just walked into the room and locked eyes with me was completely different. You can't lock eyes with a lampshade.
No.
That's the point at which you've realised that you've made a mistake. I don't think you could dream up the details of things like the tea cozy and the sandwiches and the room being different in just a split second by mistakenly looking at something else.
No. And I don't blame them for immediately just ducking outside.
And shutting the door.
I'm trying to work out if it was through fear or politeness. Like when you walk into a room where somebody's having a meeting, you're like, terribly sorry. You shut the door and they hang on a minute.
Well, funny you should say that, but I think it's just a visceral instinctive reaction to something not being how you thought it would be. I don't know whether you remember, but an apparition that I saw here at KOFY HQ in, not that many years ago, really. I saw somebody standing in the doorway downstairs and you were looking the other way at the time. But the first you knew about it was that I literally ducked and rolled behind your chair, behind your office chair. Because again, it was just my first instinctive visceral reaction was to duck out of the way because my brain just went, something is amiss, something is not right, we need to hide. So I hid behind you because, I'm so brave.
Well, I'm a fairly good shield, I would say.
Oh, bless you. But no, I think it's a really understandable reaction to your brain just going, that does not compute.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. So awesome story. Thank you again, Liz, for sharing that with us. And we're looking forward to sharing the other stories you sent in as well. But it is time to get back to the KOFY Christmas quiz. Would you like me to remind you of the question?
I would, please, yes.
Okay, so I was talking about the ghosts of Heathrow, and there's one in particular that I'm asking this question about. One of the ghosts that haunts the site of the airport is completely unrelated to aviation, being considerably older than the invention of the aeroplane. They are one of those ghosts that gets around a lot. Having been sighted at various locations through the years, they get around a lot, actually. They're very, very popular all over the country. And I'll give you a little bit of a hint in the question. Could you please tell me which historical horseman haunts Heathrow?
I have absolutely no idea. I don't think I've ever come across this, but based on your clues, particularly about the fact about how much this particular apparition gets around, I'm going to make a wild stab in the dark. Is it Dick Turpin?
It is Dick Turpin.
Yes!
Well done.
3 for 3.
Well done. Yes,
Oh.
Heathrow Airport was constructed on the site of what was once Hounslow Heath, an important coaching route between the 17th and 19th centuries, and, if you'll pardon the pun, a favourite haunt of many a highwayman. This, of course, includes perhaps the most infamous of them all, Dick Turpin. Curiously, whilst he's often seen riding a horse in the other locations that his shade has encountered, at Heathrow he seems to enjoy sneaking up on people from behind on foot.
Oh, that's unusual.
Whereupon he either barks and howls or simply breathes down their neck.
Barks and howls?
Indeed.
Okay, I've never heard of the Dick Turpin Afro. I mean, you're right, he does pop up all over the place. He's popped up in several of our research sessions for various episodes, but I've never heard of him barking and howling before.
No.
That's a new one.
I wondered whether it was different things that were being confused.
Yeah,
So
conflated maybe.
it's possible that that's the case, but in almost all the accounts I could find, they mentioned it, so...
Okay.
But it wasn't part of the question, so you weren't being scored on it. So there we go. So you're 3-0
Yep.
in the lead.
Can you pull it back? So
No.
shall I remind you?
God,
Shall I remind you? I'm
remind me.
certain that you're going to get the last question. I'm certain.
I hope so. I don't want to be completely whitewashed. That would be embarrassing.
So, can you tell me, and wild guesses are encouraged, what the May Day celebration is involving horse puppets that comes from Cornwall and still takes place every year in Padstow? Come on, you can do this. I've mentioned it to you. I know I have.
Oh, I'm sure you have. I have no doubt that you've mentioned it to me. I also have no doubt that it's gone in, bounced around my brain for a bit, and then bounced out again without leaving much of an impression, because that's the way my brain... I was going to say that's the way my brain works. That's the way my brain fails to work generally. I don't know if I could take a stab at the name.
Go on, take a guess.
I don't even know where to start on the name. I'm just trying to think
Let me
if I
give you a
could
clue.
guess about what the actual action is.
No, let me give you a clue, because I feel like you could guess the name. Right, so what are the horse puppets called? Generally, like all of them. It's the same kind of horse puppet that you ride on when you're a kid and it's made out of a broomstick.
I know what you mean. I just don't know if there's a name. Oh, hobby horse.
Yes, hobby horses. And have you ever heard of a folk festival that sounds like hobby horse? Do you want me to put you out of your misery?
I feel like there's something that's kind of poking in the back of my brain.
You're going to kick yourself.
I probably will.
Okay. It's the Obios Festival.
Oh,
I told you. I told you were going to kick yourself.
is that where hobby horse comes from then? Is that...
I know, I don't think so. I think, well, to be fair, I don't know. I didn't do a deep dive of research, but I think the hobby horse is a thing. It's something that is used in, what's it called?
I can't help but feel that Obios comes before hobby horse, though, surely?
I honestly don't know. Hobby horses are used in, not wassailing, what's the other thing? Morris dancing. Sorry, silly me. Morris dancing.
My brain is just showing me an image of, there's like a hobby horse gymkhana thing.
Oh.
And that's all my brain is showing me at the moment. It's just...
No, it's not. It's nothing like a gymkhana. And although they're called hobby horses, to be honest, they look nothing like horses. I mean, I had heard of this festival. I'd heard of the Obios Festival. And I did look it up because I was going to bring it up in our Sarah Clegg interview, but we had so much to talk about. I didn't get around to it. So I thought you might have seen it in the notes, but obviously not.
Oh, I think I did. Like, now that you've mentioned it, it kind of sounds familiar. Like it's ringing a bell. But yeah, I would never have remembered it.
So it is a big May Day procession. There's dancers, drummers, musicians, people dressed in costumes, or beribboned costumes like you often see with Morris dancers and things like that. There's 2 osses. There's a red oss and a blue oss, and they leave at different times. And then the procession winds around Padstow, following first the blue oss and then later the red oss. And they kind of go through the streets entertaining the crowds. In a similar way to the Mari Lwyd, they snap at unsuspecting passers-by, apparently specifically pretty maidens in the case of the Obioses. But they can be appeased with coins, which now go to charity. And when I say they don't look anything like horses, I mean they really don't. I don't even know how to describe them. They have tails and they do have jaws with nasty big sharp pointy teeth. Very
horses
unlike
do
a
both
horse.
have tails and jaws. I don't know about the
Not-
nasty big pointy teeth.
Not
but
pointy, sharp teeth, though. The mask is quite terrifying. I honestly don't know how to begin describing it to you. We'll perhaps chuck some links in the show notes so you can have a look for yourself. But apparently nobody knows where the design for the mask actually came from. So it's a bit of a mystery.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we brought up in the interview with Sarah as well. Like a lot of these sort of folklore events and traditions and things kind of pop up established.
Yeah.
And we don't really know where they came from. It's just because they were established and then people started writing about them because it was something people did. You don't get that initial part of,
No.
I know, I'll just make a horse face and ride around and clack it at people.
Yeah, and often, like you say, they were so well established at one time, nobody thought it was worth writing them down because everybody already knew what they were. And then some kind of suppression happened, or they went out of fashion and people stopped enacting them. And then decades and decades later, some folklorists will come across a scribbled, half account of what happened and then have to try and put the pieces back together. And nobody really knows where it came from or why. So, yeah, I think there's a fair bit of mystery around the Obios festival, but it sounds incredible.
Yeah.
And something we probably definitely need to look into a little bit more. And yeah, do have a look at the photos after we finish recording and you'll see why I say they do not look like horses.
Okay, I'll check it out. Also, bit of bizarre trivia that is slightly horse related and on a theme, because we were talking about how these things, like this knowledge is lost. I can't remember exactly when it was, but there was an early Polish dictionary in which the description of a horse was, everybody knows what a horse is.
Really?
Yeah. And,
That's
if we
amazing.
were ever, 5,000 years in the future and horses have evolved into something else or died out or something like that, imagine looking at that and going, I don't know what a horse is.
Yeah, how rude.
Explain it to me. What is a horse? I think it's a similar thing with this folklore. It's like, everybody knows what this is. Like,
Yeah,
everybody
surely.
knows why we call it Obios.
Surely I don't need to explain this.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
sure.
But there you go. A little bit of horse dictionary trivia for you.
Indeed.
But anyway, getting back to the Christmas quiz, I can't win at this point. So it's just how well you beat me.
You say that, but like I said, there's a bonus point available for my last question.
Yeah, but you're 3-0 up. So
Oh,
even
okay.
if I get that and the bonus point, I still lose.
No, fair enough.
So you might not get this one.
No,
So
okay.
you might fail. Like I haven't actually given you any real hints for this one.
Right.
And it is slightly aviation related.
Oh dear.
So-
I haven't got a hope.
There is a local legend that RAF Mildenhall is said to have had a protective spirit in the form of an old man in a long coat playing a flute, known as Old Roger. Can you tell me what it is that Old Roger did in order to protect the base and its airmen?
What he did?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what he did. Oh, I think I might lose the point on this one. I really haven't got a clue. Okay, well, I'll see if my brain churns up anything as we go through the next story.
Yeah, and you don't need to get this one. You've already won. But
but
it's
I
whether
like
you're
to.
going to whitewash
I wanna
me
win thoroughly, mate.
completely. Yeah.
You're going to do it properly. Right, are you ready for my last question? I'm certain, even if you don't know this one, you have enough scientific knowledge to work it out.
Okay. I will attempt to dazzle you with science.
Okay. So, we've just had the winter solstice, as I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And most of you will know that the iconic Stonehenge stone circle is famous for its winter solstice celebrations that still take place today. Now, over-imaginative Victorians would have you believe that one of the huge fallen sarsen stones was employed at such celebrations to catch the blood of grisly human sacrifices. An idea that they seem to have got because rainwater caught in the pitted surface of the stone turns red, something they claimed was the blood of the stone's victims seeping back out, and thus they named this sarsen the Slaughter Stone. Now, of course, it's not actually the blood of the Slaughter Stone's imaginary victims, but my question is, what is it really that causes puddles of red water on the so-called Slaughter Stone at Stonehenge?
Okay. I think I might know this, let alone be able to work it out.
Okay, and do you want the bonus point question?
Yeah, give me the bonus one question as well, please.
Okay. What did archaeologist William Hawley find underneath the Slaughter Stone during his investigation of the site in 1923.
Oh, I don't know if I know that.
No, I literally just discovered this the other day, so I wouldn't blame anybody for not knowing. I just kind of wanted to include it because I think it's an interesting piece of trivia. You can probably just have a wild guess, though.
Okay, I'll attempt to guess at that one.
Well, while we all mull those final questions over, I think it's time for our last story of the episode. And this one is actually from Fitz's friend, Conky.
So before I get started on the story, there's a little bit of information you might want to know. So Conky is a friend of mine. I've known him for years, and he used to be a pilot for an international airline. So a part of his job, he often had to stay in hotels. And because this is the aviation special, this was quite relevant, so I asked him if he could share this story with us. So, with that little bit of preamble to set the scene, here is what he told me. He said that there's a hotel that they stay at in London which is reputed to be haunted by guests who checked in and then checked themselves out. Certain floors are apparently worse than others. The 11th, for example, is supposed to be one of the most haunted ones, and he's heard that crew who get a room on that floor often request a different floor. He said, "On my last trip there, I was given a room on the 5th floor, the only member of my crew on that floor. But I thought nothing of it. Around 2 a.m, I was woken up by the lamp next to my bed flashing. I then began to feel a slight tingle in my left hand. Looking at it, I saw a green glow, similar to St. Elmo's fire, something I've experienced during my early career, where the windshields would get charged with static electricity, and if you put your hand up to it, you could sometimes get a glowing effect on your hand. I then saw a smallish figure of a woman in a long dress, floating across the room. After a few seconds, everything went back to normal. The funny thing is, I would have thought that I would have been absolutely terrified, but the whole episode was pretty mellow, and I fell back to sleep right away. On the flight home, I was discussing it with my first officer, and she told me that the 5th floor is definitely one of the haunted ones at that particular hotel."
Thank you, Conky, for that. That's a just amazing story. The bit about the St. Elmo's fire was really what piqued my interest. I mean, perhaps it shouldn't be because the whole of the story was fascinating and incredible, but, you know, we deal in ghosts every day, but this glowing kind of static electricity effect, that's not something we come across very often.
No, but the thing that jumped out at me actually was something that we do quite often come across, and it was actually at the very end of the story where they were saying, I thought I would have been scared, but I wasn't, and I went straight back to sleep afterwards. I've heard that so many times where somebody's like, I saw this thing that should have been terrifying, but it was fine. I just went to bed.
And I've actually experienced that myself as well. I mean, there have also been times when I have genuinely been really terrified and some things very much unsettled me. But yeah, I think there's probably been an equal number of occasions where something really quite weird has happened and I've been oddly calm about it and just gone, yeah, I'm tired though. I'm just going to go back to sleep now.
It's definitely a strange feeling. And it's interesting as well because I've spoken to Conky about things like this before, and it's not something that most pilots will often talk about. So for it to be common knowledge, it's got to be pretty spooky.
The other thing that interested me about the glowing was the way he described it as being like this static electricity effect. And the reason that interests me is that I so often liken the spooky, spidey, sensey vibes that, in fact, we will be talking about very shortly in the main segment. I do mention them there, but I've mentioned them on the show before. You will have heard me talk about this kind of atmosphere that you can walk into. I think once we referred to it in an interview as following the path of weird. That kind of feeling of like when you put your hand up to an old-fashioned TV and you used to be able to literally feel the static field coming off it. I have experienced that in so many paranormal locations, often just in little spots that turn out, that we find out later are like the haunted spot.
Mhm.
And because I've always described it as static electricity, just because I have nothing else really to compare it to, it's difficult to find the language for these things sometimes. The connection then to hearing Conky describe a visual effect of static electricity during a paranormal visitation, I don't really know what to make of it, but it feels like some kind of connection that we need to put together.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've never come across before. Like, I don't think I've ever heard of that visual effect that wasn't related to just seeing a ghost.
Yeah.
Like, that was definitely new.
But that almost sounds like there was a charge building up in the room that ended up with the manifestation of an apparition.
Yeah. Like, could we encourage that?
Is that measurable? I mean, we have seen paranormal investigators employ the use of, what are those static lamps? Jacob's ladders and things like that. I don't know whether they've really been used to much effect that I've particularly seen.
We need to get one of those
static balls that make your hair raise up. Yeah,
because on a Van de Graaff generator.
Yeah,
I want a mad scientist lab now. Can I have a mad scientist lab for Christmas, please?
Well, I think people have used those on paranormal investigations. I'm sure I've seen that, but this just as an anecdotal experience, it does kind of support that maybe there is a connection there. Perhaps, I don't know.
An exciting new avenue to travel down, methinks.
Definitely.
So I think it's about time to wrap up the KOFY Christmas quiz. You're already leading 3-0.
Oh, but I think I'm going to fail on this one. Go on, remind me of the question again.
Okay, so there's a local legend at RAF Mildenhall, and it's said to have a protective spirit in the form of an old man in a long coat that plays a flute, known as Old Roger. Can you tell me what it is that Old Roger did in order to protect the base and its airmen?
I genuinely have no... I mean, I want to just say play his flute. Or maybe he buried the flute somewhere. Did he, like, leave the flute up a chimney in the building or something as a protective talisman?
No, he did play the flute. I'm more interested in what happened when he played the flute.
Oh. No, I don't know. I think I'm going to have to lose the point on this one. You're going to have to put me out of my misery.
Okay, well, you've still won, but Old Roger is said to summon storms.
Oh.
Yeah, so there's an excellent article on this from Stacia Briggs of the Norfolk Folklore Society, who listeners may remember as one of the hosts of Weird Norfolk when they joined us on the show some time back. And they recount a story from one night in 1940 when RAF Mildenhall received a communication that a German attack was imminent. Scrambling to launch aircraft in defence, a lone man in a long coat was seen standing on the runway and preventing the defenders from getting airborne. As he was about to be removed, he began to play a flute, and as he did so, sand rose from the ground, the sky turned black, and a dark fog rolled in. As well as preventing the defenders from taking to the skies, it also prevented the German aircraft from reaching the Norfolk coast, as they were forced to turn around and return home. There was also a second instance where a German plane was similarly turned back in 1942. On speaking to locals, those who experienced the phantom flautist were told that it was Old Roger. And there is a lot more to the Old Roger story, and I do recommend that you check out a couple of articles written by Stacia Briggs and Shifa Connor, which I will, of course, put links to in the show notes.
Ooh, I can't believe I've never heard of that. I need to go and check out those articles right away.
It is an interesting one. It's one of those where, like we've had before, it's an old piece of folklore that's been repurposed over time. So, like, the Old Roger name is there. I think the flute and the music is there, but it's happened before. And he's meant to be a character that signifies an incoming storm rather than necessarily summoning them. In some cases, he's supposed to be the devil, but it's one of those things that's changed over time.
Yeah, so it evolves with the folklore and the people and the landscape.
Yes, definitely.
Well, those are some of my favourite, to be honest.
So, you've still got 3 points. And to be fair, there's 3 questions, 3 points. So you kind of, got them all right.
Well, sort of. But that was a tricky question at the end there. It's a good one.
Okay. I think
interesting
I've got
one.
one of the two that you've got for me. So
Okay.
Remind me of the questions.
Yeah. So, what is it really that causes puddles of red water on the so-called slaughter stone? That's a lot of S's.
Yes.
The so-called slaughter stone. And for a bonus point, what did archaeologist William Hawley find underneath the slaughter stone during his investigation of the site in 1923?
So the first one, I'm presuming it's going to be iron oxide.
Yeah.
So it's rust, basically. So it's going to be rusty water, which looks red.
Yes, there is a little bit. A lot of people say it's a combination of iron in the stone and a particular algae that grows on the sarsen stone. But I'll give you that because it was close enough.
Okay, right. Underneath. I'm not sure. Like, the only thing that springs to mind, and I'm sure it's not this because I don't think it was under one of the stones, was that I remember there being an excavation and they're finding an area where people were celebrating at midwinter, and it was just a giant mound of pig bones.
I mean, you're very correct that they did find giant mounds of pig bones that were connected to the winter solstice ritual
what we're talking
at
about.
Stonehenge, but no, it's not. It's a lot more mundane than that, actually.
Mundane. Okay. I'm trying to think of mundane objects that people might have found. So, like cups, bowls, knife.
And it's not necessarily an ancient object.
Oh. Under one of the stones?
Yep.
Oh, so by not ancient, we're not talking like modern, as in 20th century. I'm thinking maybe Victorian then, like somebody's...
So this investigation where he found the object took place in 1923.
Okay, so thinking of what an archaeologist prior to the 1920s might have had. So presumably it's like paper would have probably rotted away, also maybe pencils. A watch? Like that might stay for a while.
I mean, you were certainly more on the same track, but no. You're assuming it was an accident.
Oh, so it was deliberately placed. I mean, it could be anything then.
I know. This was a bit of a tricky one, but it is a bonus point, to be fair.
Some kind of, almost like a sort of time capsule type thing. Is it going to be like a photo of his wife or...
No, shall I put you out of your misery?
Go on, I'm never going to guess it.
Okay, so in 1923, William Hawley was investigating the slaughter stone, and underneath, he discovered a bottle of port that had kindly been left there by antiquarian William Cunnington in 1802 when he was excavating the site. He popped it under there for future excavators to enjoy.
Would port have kept... I
No,
don't know if port keeps very well.
It did not. The article, this was from the English Heritage website, and it was literally 30 things you might not know about Stonehenge, and they were very interesting, actually. And they say, disappointingly, the cork had decayed and nearly all the contents were gone.
Yeah, I don't know how long port would have lasted even with a cork, because it's not a spirit, is it? Like, it's a fortified wine.
Well, maybe antiquarian William Cunnington just didn't know how long it was going to be there before it was dug up again. Maybe longer than he thought.
Yeah, that's a shame. But, okay, I would never have guessed that. That's not something that I would have guessed if I hadn't been aware of the article, which I wasn't, so I didn't.
To be fair, I didn't really expect you to be able to guess that. I kind of just wanted to include it because I thought it was interesting.
It was very interesting. Well, so I've got 1 point. So you've clearly decimated me in this year's KOFY Christmas quiz.
Well, we have at least this year managed to keep track of our scores, which is, an
unusual.
improvement on normal.
Definitely. So, but we're also interested to know how you did.
Yes.
So if you've been playing along with the Christmas quiz, do get in touch. Let us know how many that you got. How many points would it have been?
Out of 4. Oh, what? Out of 8?
Yeah, because I had one that was 2 points.
Yeah, out of 8.
So 8. So yeah, let us know how many you got out of 8.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have a little leaderboard, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Let us know.
So the score to beat at the moment is 3 points. But that is the end of this year's KOFY Christmas quiz. But don't go anywhere because the party is not over yet. It is time to take to the skies as we search for ghosts of the air.
We got the idea to look into haunted airfields for a Christmas episode after watching the short film adaptation of Frederick Forsyth's book, The Shepherd, a couple of years ago, which hit our screens in December 2023. This classic ghost story follows the journey of young flying officer Freddie as he tries to make his way home on Christmas Eve night of 1957, flying his de Havilland Vampire over the North Sea, from his posting at a German airbase to the snow-covered fields of England. We were very taken with it as a different kind of ghost story for Christmas, and it truly is one, as author Forsyth, who was himself an RAF pilot, wrote the novella as a Christmas present for his wife. The cinematic adaptation conjures up visions of ethereal mist blanketing glittering frost-rimed airfields, while the winter silence of sleepy English villages, safely tucked in and dreaming of tomorrow's plum pudding, is broken by the roar of a single jet engine as a winged silhouette briefly blocks out the stars. This rather romantic vista was not quite what I encountered as I set out looking for a real airfield closer to home, though, on what would be our last paranormal trip of 2025. I trudge along a pitted and cracked concrete track mottled with impressive colonies of lichen, moss and white stonecrop that have taken hold in every crevice and crack. Walking away from our car, the low winter sun is dazzling, so as I make my way towards the war memorial that marks my first waypoint, all I can do is gaze downwards at my muddy boots and the grey of the worn concrete. We only drove a short way to get here, along narrow country roads linking little villages that on this mid-December day are prettily decked out with Christmas lights. Either side of me, fields stretch for miles, which is why it may seem odd that what I'm heading towards is an industrial estate. A blocky blob of grey, low buildings in a grid of tarmac, stranded oddly in the middle of a patchwork of fields. You may wonder why on earth anyone would plonk a business estate out here in the sticks, but there are many such places around the Midlands, business parks that have found homes in decommissioned RAF airbases. You can spot them all over the countryside just by looking at a satellite view map. Blocky grey estates in unlikely rural locations, seemingly miles from civilization. But the reason for their existence in such a spot is given away by the ground itself. For look down from a bird's eye view at the surrounding fields, and you will see the distinctive crisscross markings showing right through the grass or crops. The ghosts of the old runways. It turns out that old airfield barracks make great places for modern industrial estates, and the one I'm heading towards is no exception. On some of these estates, the original buildings, many abandoned at the end of the Second World War, have been razed to the ground and built over. Others remained in service and were only decommissioned in recent years, so are made up of well-maintained or modernised buildings that could simply be walked out of by the military and walked into by the businesses taking them on afterwards. And then there are those that are somewhere in between, taken out of active service but retained for several more years by the Ministry of Defence, sitting empty and falling gently into disrepair. The once bustling barracks, mess halls, hangars and control towers, echoing only silence. The scenes in The Shepherd, which depict the fictional airfield of RAF Minton, were filmed at one such derelict base.
In the story, author Frederick Forsyth places RAF Minton just inland of the east coast, reportedly a few miles from the Norfolk town of Cromer. The real airbase chosen to represent the fictional one is in fact only a few more miles inland of this, at the former RAF West Raynham, Norfolk, a base that was open from 1939 to 1994, and which at one time did actually house the first-generation jet fighter featuring in The Shepherd, the de Havilland Vampire. RAF West Raynham is no stranger to film crews, with a TV miniseries and documentary having been shot there, as well as, rather tellingly, a week-long special investigation of the paranormal TV show Most Haunted. Because West Raynham isn't just the backdrop for a fictional ghost story, it's also home to a whole catalogue of its very own spirits. Some of the sightings date back to when the building was a functioning military facility. In the 80s and 90s, witnesses reported seeing the apparition of a pilot walking from the dining room towards the kitchen and passing through the walls. An American officer's wife had a very close encounter with this particular spirit in the mess when it passed right through her and then disappeared through a wall into room number 7, a room which is reported to be icy cold all year round. The sergeant's mess also seems to be a paranormal hotspot, with visitors witnessing a green-coloured apparition in the bar area. Other reports, however, seem to come from after the building was abandoned, some by security guards, who one would imagine are well used to frequenting spooky abandoned buildings during the small hours, and must surely not get easily spooked. But apparently, the airbase's headquarters are unsettling enough that West Raynham's guards refuse to visit it alone on account of a dark presence that lurks in the shadows. There have been too many sightings of a dark, unexplained figure that stalks the corridors. Whether or not this is the same presence that haunts the guards building, we don't know. But something in there is reported to be making unexplained footsteps that can be heard throughout the building, and causing the temperature in the bathroom to suddenly plummet by up to 10 degrees. More recent reports come from ghost hunters investigating the site, some of whom probably don't have permission to be there, and apparently the resident spirits don't take kindly to trespassing, especially in the chapel, where intruders have described a dark, angry shadow chasing after them. Meanwhile, in the control room, investigators have reported a poltergeist-like entity that throws stones. Even people passing innocently by the old base, however, have reported seeing strange, eerie lights in the shut-up building at night. With such a collection of spooks and spectres, you might think that West Raynham would be in the running for the most haunted airfield in the UK, and if not, then certainly the most haunted in Norfolk. But according to British military historian Bruce Halpenny, author of the 8-book true paranormal story series Ghost Stations, both those accolades are more deserving of a decommissioned RAF base just 7 miles away from West Raynham, and it's a place that we realised we were curiously familiar with.
For quite a few years now, we have visited a favourite nearly wild woodland campsite located in rural Norfolk that we occasionally like to run away to and forget that the modern world exists for a while. A feeling that is helped along somewhat by the fact that to get to the campsite, we have to drive through an old RAF airbase that doesn't quite look part of the modern world itself. The Airfields of Britain Conservation Trust website declares that Bircham Newton is often claimed to be the best preserved disused airfield in Britain, and I can believe it. The first time we passed through the base, I thought we'd somehow got lost and ended up somewhere we weren't meant to be, with visions of being briskly escorted off an accidentally trespassed military base by folks in uniform. An odd sign here and there about the place revealed that we were actually driving through the National Construction College, but it still looked and felt like an airbase that might only have been vacated mere days ago. Neat red brick barrack blocks lined one side of the road, with plaques declaring their 1929-era build, whilst on the other side of the road, a concrete parade ground stood empty and unused. Following the road further took us through a whole complex of odd little service sheds, a and past huge hangars, with a multitude of unmistakably military-looking, square, flat-roofed buildings all around them, dating from various decades throughout the base's 44-year-long operation. RAF Bircham Newton was established in 1916, before the previously separate air forces of the British Army and the Navy had combined to create the Royal Air Force 2 years later. To begin with, it was little more than a grass airstrip, with a runway that famously delivered a hair-raising experience for pilots attempting to land on it. Built on shifting soils, it was described as having the surface of a Gruyere cheese. However, a lot more infrastructure and a whole complex of military buildings, barracks and hangars would soon spring up around the airstrip in the following decades. And by the last throes of the First World War, the base was a staging ground for an audacious dambuster-style raid planned over Berlin, using 3 Handley Page V-1500 night-flying heavy bombers. Huge 4-engined biplanes, the largest that had been so far built in England, and one of the largest aircraft in the world for the time. But the squadron never left the East Anglian airfield. After a series of delays, caused first by plane malfunctions and then by bad weather, when the 3 planes finally began to taxi out onto the runway, a ground crew member ran out frantically to stop them, shouting that armistice had been declared. The war was over. Of course, it unfortunately wasn't long before war descended once again with the onset of World War II in 1939, and this time Bircham Newton operated as part of the RAF Coastal Command, flying photographic and meteorological reconnaissance missions, as well as convoy escorts, anti-shipping and air-sea rescues. The base's flying units, which included Canadian, Dutch and Fleet Air Arm squadrons, supported the Dunkirk evacuation and D-Day landings. With peacetime, the base found a new role, that of a training college, with the Officers' Advanced Training School being established in 1948, followed by the Secretarial and Equipment Officers' School in 1949, and from 1951 becoming the RAF School of Administration. And although the base was decommissioned in 1962, it remained a training college, being taken over by the Construction Industry Training Board as their National Construction College East campus, and so it remains to this day. Maybe this transition from training campus to repurposed campus was so smooth that this is why the place still looks eerily like an airbase that was only vacated by the military mere moments ago. A feeling helped, no doubt, by the fact that every time we've driven through it, the place has seemed deserted. And I have to wonder whether both these things factor into the strange and numerous unexplained incidents that have occurred here, with hauntings that began at least as far back as the Second World War.
One of the strange occurrences dating back as far as World War II is documented by Bruce Halpenny in his book Ghost Stations, in which he describes how the apparition of a car full of laughing men has been seen speeding through the site and crashing into the rear of a hangar. This odd encounter is backed up by author Betty Puttick in her book, Norfolk Stories of the Supernatural. She relates the experience shared by a former member of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force known as WAFs, who was stationed at Bircham Newton herself during World War II. Apparently, her fellow WAFs had several curious incidents in which they clearly heard the sound of a car speeding across the base, followed by a crash that sounded as though the vehicle had collided with the back of one of the hangars. They would frequently rush out to help those who surely must have been injured in the accident, but there was never anything to be found. No car, no people, nothing behind the hangars to explain what they'd all heard. Other WAFs would hear ghostly footsteps perambulating their bedrooms, with one bed in particular seeming to be the focus of activity. Its occupants would sometimes be awoken in the night by the touch of icy, unseen hands. Of course, you may not be surprised to learn that an airbase with such a long history would have its share of resident restless spirits. After all, flying was a dangerous business, especially in the early days of canvas and wood biplanes, and precious little expertise, when pilots would often be trying to learn to fly the swiftly evolving novel technology and quite literally nothing more than a wing and a prayer. Accidents and losses weren't uncommon, something experienced firsthand by one WAF named Mary Took, who was posted to Percham Newton as a nursing orderly in 1949. Mary was on duty in sick quarters one day that summer, when around midday she heard a plane pass overhead as she was serving dinner to a patient. Of course, planes must have gone over all the time, but she could tell there was something off about this one. It was noisy and low, and soon afterwards she heard a low rumble. Only minutes later, a telephone call came through summoning the ambulance. The staff rushed into action, with a medical officer and male orderlies heading out to the site of the crash, and Mary and her WAF colleagues getting the sick quarters emergency ready. Before long, however, they saw the ambulance return, but instead of turning into the sickbay, it went straight to the morgue. Sadly, they began to put everything back in order and made tea for their pale and shaken colleagues. There had been nothing they could do for the pilot but retrieve his boots and a handful of other belongings and place them in the decontamination store, a room in the building attached to sick quarters. A few weeks later, Mary was on duty again, this time with a friend who was a relief ambulance driver. The pair of young ladies were covering the August bank holiday shift on a still and sultry evening. They would be sleeping that night in the staff bedrooms of sick quarters, and by 9 p.m. they had meticulously locked the building up, checking all the doors and windows and padlocking the sickbay doors from the inside. They had to check the locks of the decontamination building too, which was attached to sickbay. Lucky for them too, because in the hallway between rooms 2 and 3 of the decontamination centre was a table tennis table, and a bit of fun and exercise playing table tennis was quite a routine way for staff to break up the monotony of a quiet shift. Mary and her fellow WAF wedged open the doors between rooms 1, 2 and 3 that stood between sick quarters and the corridor in the decontamination centre, so that they could hear the telephone and doorbells, and then they began having a light-hearted table tennis knockabout. They'd only been playing for about 10 minutes when they heard the distinctive, dull but loud clunk of the doors between rooms 1 and 2 swinging shut. Mary snatched the ball out of mid-air to listen, turning to face the source of the sound, but found all the rooms behind her still in darkness. Mary and her colleague stood frozen for a moment over their table tennis game, mentally checking all the doors and windows they knew they had locked. They should have been completely alone in the building. Suddenly they were startled out of conducting their mental checklists when the loud, clear footsteps of someone in heavy boots started moving towards them through the darkness of room 2. The ladies ran. Kicking out the wedges from under the final set of double doors, they retreated into the staff duty room and locked themselves in. Mary keeping watch on the corridor for whoever, or whatever, had been striding towards them, while her colleague phoned the RAF police. She kept watch on the corridor of the decontamination centre until the police arrived. but nothing ever emerged out of the darkness of room 2. And when the police had thoroughly checked all the way around both buildings, they found everything secured exactly as it should have been, and no sign of anyone in either building. The footsteps and the closing door were a mystery. Except Mary couldn't help but wonder about the poor pilot who had been lost in that crashed aircraft just a few weeks earlier. The pilot whose boots, bloodied paybook and other personal items were still in the decontamination storeroom. No human being had entered the locked and secured sick ward that night. But had the restless spirit of the downed pilot returned for his belongings?
It wasn't only the WAFs, though, who were left shaken by the inexplicable happenings on the base. In the officers' mess, a senior engineer working in the attic was tapped on the shoulder 3 times, despite being completely alone up in the space. Afterwards, he refused to ever work there again. Elsewhere in the building, one of the windows almost continually seems to be broken, no matter how many times it's reglazed, and nobody can seem to find a reasonable explanation. An invisible hand has also been known to repeatedly turn off the radiators in the middle of the night. This might seem like something that could happen by accident, but in fact, the stopcock is located in the recess of a bedroom, has a cover over it that is screwed into the wall, and, if that wasn't enough, the whole thing is also hidden behind a wardrobe. Once, the water was turned off 4 nights running, and during cold weather, which seems a bit too far for any would-be prankster to go, even if they could pull off the unlikely logistics of getting behind the wardrobe and unscrewing the panel without being seen. The strange happenings at Bircham Newton weren't just confined to its time as an airbase, though. When the base was decommissioned and handed over to the Construction Industry Training Board, the hauntings, it seemed, were only just warming up. The main reason that most of the RAF base is so well preserved is largely because its layout fit the training college so well. The service sheds, workshops, conference rooms, and the large space of the hangars all transforming themselves admirably into the campus of a construction training college. And the residential blocks were perfect for college attendees to stay in, although some of those attendees might disagree with that statement. One man staying on campus for construction training was startled when the sheets were pulled off his bed by an invisible force. Another trainee had his curtains ripped down and flung across the room. Some students of the college were so disturbed by the supernatural encounters that they couldn't bring themselves to stay long enough to finish their courses, including one student who witnessed an apparition in RAF uniform walk straight through a wall. Apparently, the wall in question had not existed during the RAF's residency, but was added after the college took over the base. Behind the huge C-type hangars, the actual runway is gone, dug up along with the perimeter track. But a great deal of the complex of buildings remain largely undisturbed, including some of the oldest buildings, one of which is a squash court that was constructed on the base way back in its early days, 1918, the same year that the RAF formed. Today, it still stands on the exact same spot, right near the edge of the base. The old officers' mess on one side, miles of Norfolk fields on the other, uninterrupted in its use as a squash court for over 100 years, and, probably, the most haunted building on what was already a very haunted airbase. This haunting hit the headlines of a local newspaper called the Lynn News and Advertiser in December of 1971, well into former RAF Bircham Newton's new life as a construction college. The article told how, in August of the previous year, a film unit had stayed on campus for a while to shoot a management training film. But, whilst completing their work, they encountered some of the airbase's previous residents, or at least the echoes of them. And it started off with a curiously helpful spirit intervention.
One summer day, with the crew hard at work filming in the old officer's mess, nobody noticed a heavy studio lamp topple and fall straight towards the unsuspecting head of Peter Clark, sound recording mechanic, until it was nearly on top of him. That weighty lamp could have seriously injured Peter, but inexplicably, at the last moment, the lamp swerved to the right and completely changed trajectory as if diverted by an unseen hand, missing the startled but thankful man and crashing harmlessly across a table. Remarkably, nothing was even broken. On another day, Peter's colleague, assistant soundman Kevin Gary, heard about the old squash courts and fancied a game. Nobody else was interested in playing, but he decided to go ahead anyway and borrowed the only key to the courts. Once inside, he locked himself in the brick building alone and started playing on the left court. For some reason, he decided to switch to the right court and try that one out. As it happens, the right-hand court had a bit of a reputation for being unnaturally chilly and oddly forbidding, and Kevin was about to find this out for himself. As he was playing, he thought he heard someone moving around somewhere behind him. He listened closer, and there it was, footsteps that seemed to be coming from the viewing gallery. For a moment he forgot that he was locked in the court alone with the only key. But as it slowly dawned on him that he was supposed to be the only person in the building, and the hackles on his neck started to prickle with apprehension, he heard someone behind him let out a heavy sigh. He turned to face the viewing gallery, and there, clear as day, was a man dressed in full RAF flying gear. Flabbergasted, he simply stared at the unlikely visage for several seconds, and then the apparition vanished into thin air. Kevin grabbed his gear and bolted for the door as fast as his legs would carry him. He didn't stay away for long though, and in fact returned the very same night. Kevin told a colleague about the unsettling experience, and you've guessed it, that colleague just happened to be Peter Clark, who had so recently had his own very strange experience on the base. The two men agreed that they wanted to investigate the strange happenings further, and fortunately for us, they turned to their professional expertise to do so. Both men being sound engineers, they took one of the film unit's professional tape recorders into the squash courts, set it running with half an hour's worth of brand new tape, and locked it inside. In an interview, Peter Clark admitted that they had originally been intending to lock themselves in the courts with the recorder, but when they went in to set up the equipment and check that there was nothing and nobody in the space that could contaminate their experiment, they found the atmosphere so frightening that they decided to stay outside after all. In the calm, clear and moonlit night, the two men waited, eager to see if they would capture on tape the footsteps that Kevin had heard. Whatever they found on that recording, they could be sure that no one could have got into the court without them seeing, and there could be no sounds unnoticed by them in the still, warm August night that could have penetrated the 9-inch thick brick walls. When they went in to retrieve the recorder and tape, both men noted that the right-hand squash court felt otherworldly and frightening. Then, just as they were about to make their exit, they heard footsteps coming along the gallery. Nothing visible could be seen coming towards them, even as they heard the footsteps moving closer and closer and closer. the sound engineers grabbed their equipment and fled. As it turned out, they didn't capture any footsteps on the tape, but what they did record was possibly even stranger. Sounds that don't even seem like they could have been recorded in an empty wood interior squash court, and certainly not one that was locked up with nothing and no one inside it. But instead of describing it to you, we'll let you have a listen to some of the clips for yourselves.
I'm sure you will all agree that for an empty building devoid of all people, machinery, or equipment in a near midnight Norfolk country landscape, that is an awful lot of noise captured on the sound engineer's tape. Crashes, bangs, dragging sounds, loud metallic clangs, and lighter pings almost like someone tapping a teaspoon, the drone of an aircraft, and maybe most disturbing of all, voices. Unintelligible in terms of the words spoken, but unmistakably voices. There was a lot of speculation in trying to identify the distinct sound of each of these noises, and the tape soon found a rapt audience when BBC Radio 4 played the sounds over the air on their prominent Today show, hosted by Jack DeManio. Many people wrote in to give their thoughts on the sounds, including people who had been posted to Bircham Newton during its years as an RAF base and had recognised sounds that were very familiar to them, just not in the context of a squash court. Many said that the roaring whine sounded like the noise of a piston engine, with one man likening it to a twin or piston engine aircraft standing on the apron with its engine ticking over. A number of people remarked that the recording sounded uncannily like the everyday sounds of an RAF crew working in a hangar, which was all well and good, except, of course, that it wasn't recorded in a hangar, and the airbase had been decommissioned for nearly a decade. In fact, the large C-type hangars that still stand on the site to this day are actually over the other side of the complex completely. The squash courts sit behind what used to be the officers' mess, the other side of the road to where the airfield and associated buildings were, and set back quite far from the road. It's worth remembering, though, that the squash courts were some of the oldest buildings on the site, and whereas other parts of the complex had changed and developed over the years. One report noted that in the 1918 layout, the squash courts would have been adjacent to the original mess buildings, hospital, and mortuary. The letters from people listening into the radio show also revealed two other interesting things. Firstly, that there were many more people than first realised who had strange experiences at Bircham Newton during their postings there, with reports of a phantom airman being frequently seen about the place. The other was possibly even more curious. Many pet owners got in touch with the radio station to report that when the tape recordings were being played, their animals started acting strangely, reacting to the sounds with curiosity or even outright fear. One girl went on record to say that both her dogs were strangely unsettled by the sounds issuing from the family radio. Her Alsatian looked up at the source of the noise, and all the dog's fur stood straight up on end as it stared. Her other dog, meanwhile, was so disturbed by the noises that it slunk away in fear and hid underneath a cupboard. The reporters found this so strange that they decided to try an experiment. They wondered if the effect could be repeated if they aired the recordings again. They managed to get a local radio station on board with the investigation, and the station agreed to air the recordings. The results were quite astonishing, as once again listeners contacted the show to report their animals acting strangely and fearfully during the broadcast of the odd sounds. Since we very sadly have no pets at present here at KOFY HQ, we aren't able to confirm whether the recordings have a similar effect when played from clips of probably several generations of copies. But if any of you have animals at home, do let us know if you noticed any odd reactions from them.
Of course, theories as to what could have caused the unexplained sounds were rife. But the most popular amongst them was that all the engineers had recorded was the sounds of the building itself settling. After all, structures do expand and contract somewhat according to changing temperatures. And the best people to investigate this claim would of course be building construction experts, of which, very handily, there was an abundance, given that the squash courts were now part of the National Construction Training College. Having weighed up the information available to them in terms of dates, times and temperatures, their expert conclusion was that at the time the recording took place, the building temperatures would have stabilised, and they did not think that the sounds on the tape were that of the building settling. To go one step further, though, they tried to repeat the experiment, leaving tape recorders running inside the empty squash courts. But their recorders captured nothing. For good measure, the sound engineers sent the tape to the BBC to see what their audio experts would make of it. But this avenue came up empty-handed as well. The BBC sound specialists declared that they were collectively puzzled. To their minds, the sounds were too clear and too metallic to have been coming through the thick brick walls from the outside. They were aware that a brand new tape had been used, so they knew they weren't listening to the phantoms of previous recordings. And to their knowledge, there was no kind of internal fault or noise within the recorder itself that would have produced those types of sounds. They were convinced that the noises had been recorded through the microphone and onto the machine, but they couldn't explain how. Presumably through this interaction, BBC TV then picked up on the story and decided they wanted to investigate for themselves. Only instead of audio engineers, they employed the skills of two prominent members of a leading British spiritualist society, a clairvoyant and famous medium, John Sutton.
The crew that day maintained that Sutton and his colleague had never visited Bircham Newton before and knew nothing about the site. Yet straight away, both spiritualists mentioned the sense of otherworldliness and oppressive chill of the right-hand squash court, and quickly started picking up on the spirits there. Amongst the names was a man called Wiley, who had died during his posting to the base, but the entities they were most excited by were 3 spirits who the medium claimed were asking for help and who didn't realise that they had died. The spiritualists came up with 3 names: Dusty Miller, Pat Sullivan, and Jerry Arnold. Sutton appeared to channel the voice of at least one of these dead airmen, issuing broken sentences to his colleague and the surrounding crew in halting, breathless whispers. Fire! Near! Help us! What can we do? He was able to expand on this after his trance state and explained that during his channeling session, he had discovered that the 3 friends, Dusty, Pat, and Jerry, had died together in an aircraft accident when their Avro Anson had gone down in flames behind a church with a tower but no steeple. And the reason they were frequenting the squash court? Well, in life, the 3 friends had been very keen squash players, and the courts had been their regular hangout. So they made a pact that if anything ever happened to them, they would try to reunite at the squash courts. The BBC were unfortunately unable to check the names of the airmen provided by the medium, because at that time the military would not allow those records to be released. However, they were able to discover that an Avro Anson aircraft did indeed crash nearby, behind Bircham Newton Church in fact, which does have a tower without a steeple, just as the channeled voice coming through Sutton had described. A small detail that was nevertheless unusual for an area where most of the church towers did have steeples. Sutton was certain that these lost souls needed and wanted his help moving on to the other side, and urged them to look up, let go of the earth, and go towards the light. Sutton's colleague can be heard stating commandingly in a recording made of the séance on the squash court. He then declared through the voice of his spirit guide that the lost airmen were now being helped, and that there would be no more disturbances at the squash courts, even going as far as to say that if there were any more reports of people experiencing strange activity at that place, well, it must have been produced by their own minds. The only problem with this was that, unbeknownst to the BBC TV crew, BBC 4's Today radio show had, by pure coincidence, sent a reporter of their own to visit Bircham Newton squash courts, later that very same day. Although they didn't send mediums, they sent a very down-to-earth lady by the name of Rita Dando, who was certain that there was a completely logical explanation for all the eerie happenings. But it seems that the ghosts of the squash courts didn't get the message, nor did they get the memo that they were supposed to have moved towards the light.
Rita arrived with a friend, and the 2 women borrowed the key to the squash court and locked themselves inside, making sure that no pranksters could sneak in and mess with them. They had intended to stay in the squash courts, making recordings for part of the night, but things did not go according to plan. There is a recording of Rita's visit, but it is quite short, and mainly consists of a little moving around, followed by a loud bang. What she captured was the sound of the locked door flying open and slamming itself shut again, a task that was impossible to achieve from outside the building when the 2 women were locked inside it, and the key with them. Despite the impossibility of the feat, however, the door proceeded to fly open and shut again of its own volition a further 2 times, after which Rita's tape recorder suddenly refused to function, something that had never happened to that piece of equipment before. No matter what she did, she just couldn't get the thing working again. Unable to complete her task without the recorder, the women decided that there was nothing for it except to retreat to their hotel for the night. Having made it back to their hotel room, lo and behold, the recorder started working perfectly again, just as mysteriously as it had stopped. Whether or not the famous medium had succeeded in helping the lost airmen move on from the squash courts, there certainly seemed to be something, or someone, still there, that had no intention of leaving. Further investigations were carried out in the following years, including multiple investigations by a team called the Anglian Society for Paranormal Research, who gained permission to investigate the courts. Interestingly, whereas the Construction Training Board's tape recordings had picked up no activity at all, the Anglian Paranormal Society's recordings picked up many of the odd noises first recorded by the film unit, including voices. They also took a lot of photographs around the site, many of which revealed on-camera appearances of strange, almost ectoplasmic-looking mists. So, it would seem that the ghosts of Bircham Newton's squash courts may not have been laid to rest after all, and neither had the phantoms around the rest of the site either. We'll move on from this intriguing site with one final tale, recorded by Polly Howard in her book Norfolk Ghosts and Legends. While conducting research for another of her books in the early 1990s, a Fenland man shared a touching story with her. He seemed a little reluctant, even rather embarrassed, to be talking about the supernatural. Even though the author had penned multiple titles on the paranormal, the man seemed to think she would find his tale unbelievable. He shared that he had been based at RAF Bircham Newton during the Second World War, and had, a few years ago, gone back to visit the place. A long pause followed before he overcame his reluctance. You see, on his return visit, he was surprised to see his best friend from those war years, an airman who had also been based at Bircham Newton, only his friend had been shot down in action in 1941. It was broad daylight, and the man could see no other people around, nor any planes anywhere. But there was his friend, crossing the camp in flying gear and looking straight ahead, neither seeing his friend from a different era or showing any inkling that his future was about to be cut short. The Fenland man described it as feeling like time had slipped back 50 years. He said he could even feel the palpable tension of war in the air that he remembered from those difficult days. Yet, reluctant to admit it as he may have been, he was in no doubt at all as to what he saw, and he was not scared by seeing the apparition of his friend. Instead, he felt honoured to have borne witness to the echo of his good friend on the old and very haunted airfield of Bircham Newton.
Whilst it's not possible to visit Bircham Newton beyond the memorial and small museum they have there, the rest being privately owned of course, we have visited many other haunted air bases over the years. Many of these we visited long before we ever started the podcast, either to tour the museums or attend air shows to watch incredible flying displays by aircraft old and new. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you probably know that Fitz has a particular interest in aircraft and flying, but both of us had grandparents who served in the RAF during World War II, and the connection feels somewhat baked into our bones. I vividly remember taking my grandma to a local air museum. It was just a tiny Nissen hut at the time, filled with artefacts from both world wars. As I was pushing her wheelchair around, we heard a low rumble in the distance that grew more resonantly throaty as it came overhead, until the thin tin walls were vibrating with the unmistakable sound of a Merlin engine. My grandma seemed suddenly electrified, practically humming with an expectant energy as she almost leapt out of her wheelchair, proclaiming, "I know that sound! Wheel me out!" I did so, swiftly and just in time for us both to see the familiar shape of a supermarine Spitfire swooping low over the airfield. We'd been lucky enough to happen upon someone flying that day who decided to grace the little museum with a flypast. There is just something about the very particular roar of a Merlin engine that seems to stir some kind of generational memory that almost makes the hair on the back of your neck stand on end. By the time we came up with the idea of doing a Ghosts in the Air episode, though, it had been many years since we'd visited an airfield, haunted or otherwise. So, in the autumn, we decided to make a trip to nearby RAF Cosford in Shropshire, home to the famous Cosford Air Show and a truly fascinating ghost story. Unlike Bircham Newton, RAF Cosford is still an active British airbase and a major part of the Defence College of Technical Training, but the public can visit one part of it, which houses an incredible museum of aviation history.
I have visited Cosford a few times now, and on more than one occasion I've practically had the entire museum to myself. For an introvert, it is a wonderful, if occasionally eerie experience, and I can highly recommend that you visit if you get the chance. There's plenty to see, including examples of all three of the British V-bombers in the Cold War exhibit, which made up the RAF's Strategic Nuclear Strike Force in the 50s and 60s. My favourite being the strangely underappreciated Victor, with its sleek swept wings and tail, which seemed to take more than a little design inspiration from the sci-fi rockets of the period, and which is often completely overlooked in favour of the more famous Vulcan, with its huge and distinctive delta wing. Both are rather striking in their appearance, and make the poor Valiant, with its much more traditional design, seem rather staid and ordinary in comparison. Another personal favourite, the English Electric Lightning, mounted vertically just above a first-floor walkway, is also a very impressive sight. Like the Victor and Vulcan, the Lightning is another distinctive-looking aircraft, with its twin-stacked jet engines and notched delta wing. It just looks fast, and for its time it really was. Lightning pilots described flying it as like being saddled to a skyrocket. The vertical mounting of the display also mirrors the Lightning's famous ability to stand on its tail and climb almost vertically after takeoff. And the Cold War hangar is just one of the many exhibits. There's plenty to see, from First World War planes made from canvas and string to experimental jets. But there's one plane in particular that you really ought to go and see, and that is the rather famously haunted Avro Lincoln. RF-398, the designation given to the piston-engine aircraft housed in Cosford's War in the Air Hangar 3, is the only surviving example in the UK of the Avro Lincoln, developed from the airframe of the more well-known Avro Lancaster, the four-engine bomber with its distinctive elliptical twin-fin tail, famous for the Dambusters raid, and an iconic component of the Battle of Britain memorial flight. In fact, the first Lincolns were originally known as the Lancaster 4 and 5, before being renamed the Lincoln 1 and 2. First flown in June of 1944, they entered service too late to see action in World War II, and with the development of jet engines, their days were numbered before they even became operational. Bomber Command phased out their Lincolns in the mid-50s, replacing them with more modern jet aircraft, and the last 5 that remained in service with 151 Squadron Signals Command were retired in 1963. The Lincoln was said to be a delight to fly, so much so in fact that there was a story that the last pilot to fly RF-398 into Cosford, one Master Pilot Hiller, loved it so much that he said he would come back and haunt his baby after his death. According to the legend, he unfortunately wasn't waiting long to do so, as he sadly perished shortly afterwards in an air crash near Cosford. I spent hours trying to research this incident and kept hitting wall after wall. I didn't have the pilot's full name or the date of the supposed crash, what he was said to be flying, or the location. In short, I was getting nowhere fast, which is unusual as air crashes and incidents in the UK are investigated by the Air Accident Investigation Branch, and a report, which is available to the public, is created for each incident. In account after account, I kept seeing this story of Master Pilot Hiller, but none provided any further information, until I hit pay dirt. I came across the book Flying Strangest Moments by John Harding, and it seems that John had better access to historical records than I do. He managed to confirm that Hiller was not the last person to fly the Lincoln. That was actually a chap called John Langley. In fact, the name Hiller appears nowhere in official records for the aircraft, and there is also no record of a crash near Cosford involving a pilot named Hiller. So, does this mean that the Cosford Lincoln isn't haunted after all? Well, that is a very interesting question.
The haunting of the Lincoln at Cosford has been featured in books and podcasts, in papers and the TV news, as well as having been investigated by a few paranormal investigators. As hauntings go, it's relatively famous. This all seems to imply that even if there wasn't a Captain Hiller, there must be something haunting the aircraft. But, as Fitz was somewhat disappointed to discover, after only a little bit of digging, the entire story of RF-398 being haunted was, in fact, a hoax. In the 1970s, mechanics that were working on the restoration of the Lincoln were rather fond of the aircraft, and when they found out that it was due to be transferred to another museum at Manchester, they tried to come up with a plan to prevent it. What they came up with was creating the idea that the plane was haunted. The mechanics' reasoning was that it would drum up some interest in the aircraft, and that with larger visitor numbers, the Lincoln might have a better chance of staying at Cosford. Whether this ruse worked, or whether by sheer coincidence, RF-398 remains there to this day. The mechanics were very pleased with themselves when they managed to get the ghost written about in the local paper and talked about on the local radio. But from there, it seemed to spiral out of their control. They were even contacted by the local vicar to see if they would like him to exorcise the spirit. The story was later featured in a BBC programme called Strange But True in October of 1993, which, amongst other things, recreated scenes of the mechanics as they fabricated the story. The name they came up with for the ghost was Pete the Poltergeist. I'm not sure if this actually happened or if it was just a funny bit of dialogue for the recreation, but I kind of like it, so we'll roll with it. In the early 1980s, it was confirmed that RF-398 would be staying at Cosford, and the mechanics considered their task complete and quietly stopped reporting any supernatural activity. And that might have been the end of the story, except for the fact that people entirely unrelated to the original hoax actually started to experience paranormal activity in and around the aircraft that should only ever have been fictionally haunted. A mysterious figure began to be seen in the gun turret in the tail of the aircraft and in the navigator's seat of the cockpit. A shadowy figure was also seen walking around the hangar itself, and one mechanic reported an even more extraordinary occurrence. One day, As he was working on the Lincoln, he tripped and fell. The Lincoln is a big aircraft, not one of the nippy little Spitfire-sized planes, but a big beastie whose cockpit stands maybe 15 feet above the ground. And the fall was from enough of a height that the thought flashed through the mechanic's mind as the ground raced towards him that he could be seriously injured or even killed. But thankfully, neither of those things happened. Instead, he found himself floating to a stop, suspended by an invisible force. On another occasion, a mechanic working on the Lincoln had a much less life-threatening incident, but one that was nearly as curious. He only dropped a spanner, but before he could turn to pick it up again, he found that it had somehow been deliberately thrust back into his hand. He was alone in the aircraft at the time.
Both of these reports from the mechanics were from the 1980s, and according to the information I found, should be after the original hoax was ceased. But they are certainly close enough in time that there may be some doubt over their truthfulness. However, the interest in the plane that the mechanics had roused drew curious reporters and investigators, in particular Ivan Spenceley, a paranormal investigator who carried out some sound recordings inside the plane one evening, the results of which were very strange indeed. He placed an audio recorder inside the cockpit near the radio operator's position, and then both aircraft and the hangar were locked up after confirming that no one was left inside. Ivan, in true belt and braces style, even added some security tape that would confirm whether or not the seal on the doors had been broken before they re-entered. When they returned, the seals were unbroken, and Ivan had captured something on his recorder. The noises he recorded were clicking sounds that were very reminiscent of switches being flicked, but Ivan wasn't certain enough that this was the case and couldn't be explained more simply by something like the hangar itself settling as it cooled. Ivan decided that further investigation was required, and his multiple visits would culminate in an overnight vigil inside the aircraft alongside veteran BBC reporter Glyn Richards in 1991. It was actually Glyn himself who would spot the most interesting event of the night when he was looking down the fuselage to the rear gunner's position. Coming from that direction, he could see a small pinprick of light that seemed to sweep from side to side. The light was travelling up the fuselage, approaching Glyn and Ivan. The BBC reporter quickly turned to his fellow investigator to confirm that he was also seeing the same thing, and it was not just his eyes playing tricks on him. But Ivan confirmed that he too was seeing the strange light. Neither man was able to explain the light, and it was only after Glyn had shared their experiences on his radio program that he received a suggestion as to what it might have been. One listener wrote into the show to share a very interesting insight. He explained that, in his experience, when crews were night flying, they would turn the concave reflectors of their torches the other way around to tighten the beam into a tiny pinprick so as not to ruin the pilot's night vision and still allow them to carry out their duties. Glyn admits that whilst it isn't exactly definitive proof, it does very much match what he saw. However, perhaps the most interesting evidence that Ivan was able to obtain came from his multiple audio recordings. After his initial attempt, he returned several times and placed recorders both inside the aircraft and in the hangar itself to confirm that the sounds were indeed coming from inside the aircraft. And, as before, he placed security tape seals on the doors to confirm that no one had tampered with the aircraft or the recordings. The sound of flicking switches came through on the recordings again, very much calling into question the theory that the sound could be explained away by the structural settling of the hangar, which would vary widely depending on the temperature of the day. But he decided to go one step further and see how well it did match up to the sounds of the switches inside the aircraft, by recording himself manually flicking the switches inside the cockpit of the Lincoln. The sound was identical. Fascinated, he invited the former crew of RF-398 to listen to the recordings, and they had something even more interesting to add. Not only did they recognize the sound of the Lincoln's cockpit switches from Ivan's inexplicable recordings, they were even able to identify that the pattern of clicks matched the pattern of switches someone would use whilst carrying out pre-flight checks. And if this wasn't mind-blowing enough, there was one more revelation to come. Something else that had come through on one of Ivan's recordings was a strange high-pitched whine. At first he thought it might have been some kind of interference, but he decided to turn to the Lincoln's former crew once again. And once again, they did indeed recognize the sound. Or at least the crew's navigator did. In fact, the odd whine was quite distinctive to him. It was the sound of a piece of navigation equipment that had been installed on the Lincoln called console. The only problem was, the last working console unit was decommissioned in 1956, over 25 years previously. All this leaves us with a bit of a conundrum. How did RAF Cosford end up with a seemingly quite haunted plane, when that plane should have only ever been haunted by a hoax? Maybe there was always something strange about it, and perhaps the mechanics in the 80s subconsciously picked up on this when they were inspired to create their tall tale to keep the Lincoln on sight. Or maybe the belief in Pete the Poltergeist gained such momentum that the collective consciousness had actually created a ghost. We will probably never know, but I was interested to see what we would find on our return visit. And I was interested to see what Lil would make of the famous, or maybe infamous, Lincoln. We had visited Cosford together once before, but it had only been a flying, no pun intended, visit to the visitor centre for a quick coffee and comfort break on our way to a holiday cottage in Shropshire over a decade ago. And we'd not had time to tour all of the hangars. This time, though, we were dedicating a whole day to the experience. Most especially, Hangar 3.
Fitz had told me many times how quiet the museum at Cosford usually is, so I was surprised and a bit disgruntled when we turned up on a blustery early September day to find the car park and outside play area packed with families. We had thought that we were visiting on a weekday in term time, so it would be nice and quiet. But in fact, we had not taken into account that school term dates varied county to county, and it seemed that we had unwittingly planned our visit on one of the last days of this county's summer holidays, when local families were attempting to tire out their fractious children with a trip to the museum and playground. Fortunately, though, most of the visitors that day were clustered around the visitor centre and play area, and the hangars were much quieter. We dutifully toured all the exhibits, as it is a truly amazing museum, especially given that the only cost is a charge for parking. But of course, we were itching to get to the main event, Hangar 3. I had asked Fitz to take the lead on the research for this case. It's not often I get an opportunity to visit a haunted location without having done at least a bit of a dive into the history and stories. But it was easy to hand this case over to KOFY's resident plane nerd and arrive blissfully unencumbered by expectations. In fact, as I entered the huge and echoey Hangar 3, I didn't even know what I was looking for. I hadn't looked up any pictures of the Lincoln, and with my limited knowledge of warplanes, I was expecting it to be something in camouflage, not a million miles away from something Spitfire-y. As it turns out, the Lincoln looks absolutely nothing like a Spitfire, as I was about to find out to interesting effect. As I ambled around the displays, expecting at some point to simply come across a sign indicating that I had found the Avro Lincoln, I became mesmerised by an aircraft that had had its tail gun removed and was lit up inside, giving visitors a rare peek inside the aircraft, looking up the fuselage towards the cockpit. I don't know what I was expecting, but I was fascinated peering into the interior of the plane, if only because my brain couldn't make sense of anything in that cramped space. There didn't appear to be any seats or anything that my mind could identify. It was just an unintelligible jumble of wood and metal to me. And then, without warning, the lights inside the fuselage blinked out, and the small space was plunged into darkness. My heart leapt into my throat. Was this the haunted Lincoln? Had I just experienced some of the weirdness surrounding the famous plane? No, I hadn't. I had merely encountered paranormal blooper number 1 of the day. The aircraft was, in fact, a Vickers Wellington bomber, and as I stood there, camera now in hand, the lights came back on, before, some time later, blinking out and on once again. I'm not sure whether it was on a timer to do this deliberately, or whether there was just some faulty cabling somewhere, but it definitely didn't seem to be anything paranormal. I moved on with my hunt for the haunted plane. I had soon gone around most of the exhibits in Hangar 3, and still hadn't managed to find the Lincoln or any spooky vibes. But as I was approaching the east end of the hangar, my spidey senses started tingling as I walked into what I can only describe as a palpable atmosphere, like an electrified mist that hung across the only corner of the hangar I had not yet explored and leached out towards the central line of the space. I was thrown. It didn't seem to be coming from any of the aircraft or artefacts around me, and I wheeled around looking for a likely culprit. Something that looked like an unexploded and rusty bomb sat atop a display. Was it coming from that? No. It was further behind me. But before I could turn around to see what was at my back, Fitz appeared and said, "Can you feel the vibes yet?" "Yes," I blurted, "but where is it?" "Right there," he pointed. I don't know how I hadn't seen it before. The plane is huge. It was weirdly almost as though my mind wouldn't register it until I'd felt it first. Although, to be fair, I had no idea what I was looking for. The Avro Lincoln was not what I expected. A huge hulk of dark grey plane with 4 propellers looking ready to whir into life at any second, and cockpit and bomb aimer's position glass glinting in the overhead lights. The bomb bay was open, making it look somehow vulnerable in the stark white museum lights, and the atmosphere coming off the thing in waves made my nerves jangle and my body actually shake. It was quite overwhelming. Just then, both of us feeling like we were wading through a bath of strange static, a head popped up in the cockpit. Fitz nearly fainted.
Sadly, it was not Pete the poltergeist, but a real flesh and blood mechanic carrying out an asbestos inspection inside the historic aircraft, making paranormal blooper of the day number 2. There were quite a few volunteer mechanics and engineers clustered around the plane, and we noticed that even the ones who appeared to be working on other aircraft would regularly gravitate back to the Lincoln and join back up with a group that were working there. In the huge hangar, The haunted plane seemed to be the central hub, where all the volunteers gathered. It seems that the love for the Lincoln has not waned one bit since the 80s, when a hoax was concocted to keep it on site. One of the mechanics was kind enough to take one of our phones and snap some photos from inside the fuselage for us, which was very special and much appreciated. We tried to coax them into a bit more conversation, but there were lots of visitors trying to get their attention, and they were soon answering someone else's questions. Frustratingly, as we were walking away, we overheard them cheerfully announcing to one visitor admiring the Lincoln, "It's haunted, you know." Why couldn't he have led with that when he talked to us? We didn't get any more information from our eavesdropping, but it was clear that the legend of Pete the Poltergeist was still alive and well. Because there was so much bustle and human activity around the Lincoln, it made it difficult to film anything or try and take audio recordings, because there was just too much noise. So we decided to head out, have a sit and a coffee on one of the outdoor benches, and see if it calmed down nearer to closing time.
While we sat and recaffeinated, I was gazing in a mindless, rather unfocused way down the length of the site, towards another huge hangar, painted grey with a strip of green towards the base. My eyes widened, and I started as I realised that I could see a line of dark greyish shadow figures moving across the strip of green at the base of the hangar. No, not just moving. They were marching. My breath caught in my throat. I was actually watching a line of marching shadow figures manifest in broad daylight. Until, that is, the line of shadow figures started to emerge in full Technicolor camouflage uniforms from the end of what wasn't actually a painted strip of hangar at all. It was, in fact, a strip of green mesh fabric fencing running just in front of the hangar that had partially obscured a very real line of living, breathing uniformed troops marching across the active RAF base. I let out my breath like a deflating balloon. Strike 3 on the paranormal bloopers. By now, it was only a few minutes from closing time, and we thought we'd risk one more visit to the Lincoln before we left to try and get some photos and footage of the plane without all the visitors inadvertently photobombing our shots. The vibes had not dissipated at all, although it was a little easier to deal with this time now I knew what to expect. Now, though, with all the mechanics and engineers, and all but the last few straggling visitors gone, there was a slightly different flavour to the air, an air of expectancy, as though something were about to happen. The only people left were right over the other side of the hangar, which was a significant distance away, so I decided to whip out my digital recorder and try an EVP session. I switched it on and started to walk underneath the open belly of the Lincoln. I took a breath to dictate the date and time to the recorder for future reference, but I got no further than a mumbled, "Okay," before a meaty thunk clanged right over my head and reverberated through the panels of the plane. I froze. I thought all the volunteers had gone. The plane seemed empty. Fitz had evidently heard the loud noise too, and we both started hunting around to find the mechanic we must surely have missed. It sounded exactly like someone inside the plane had dropped a spanner or something, and it had happened right over my head. Surely this must be another paranormal blooper. After all, the day had been chock full of them.
We looked and we looked, but to no avail. There was no one inside the plane. Not a peep further sounded from inside the machine, and there was no one else even remotely nearby. We waited and watched, expecting to be proven wrong any second. And then I saw a pair of legs quickly walk behind the aircraft. Aha! We had our culprit at last. Except, whoever the legs had belonged to failed to appear on the other side of the Lincoln. Camera in hand, Lil started to hunt around, peering under the fuselage and beyond the wheels. When, there, just 2 fast footsteps, quick as lightning. She exclaimed as she saw them whiz past near one of the wheels. Only having seen it out of the corner of her eye, she was disappointingly sure that she probably hadn't captured it on camera, but we carried on filming regardless. We filmed as we walked around the plane in the direction of where the feet had been heading, to where there was nothing but a blank wall and an emergency exit that was alarmed. Nobody could have gotten out that way, not without us seeing them, and if anyone had come around the other side of the plane, they would have smacked straight into us. We were simply left wondering what on earth we had seen and heard. We waited as long as we could, until we saw staff doing their final sweep of the building to shepherd out any stragglers, but we didn't hear any more noises from the Lincoln, nor did we see any more shadowy feet or legs. Sadly, we were correct, and did not capture the feet on camera, but we did capture the thunk that came from directly above Lil's head as she stood under the belly of the Lincoln, dictaphone in hand. Unfortunately, the inbuilt compression of the dictaphone makes it sound a lot less hollow and resonant than it sounded in real life, but we'll play it for you anyway.
Okay.
So, did we encounter Pete the Poltergeist on our autumn visit to Cosford? And if so, is it the spirit of a dead airman tied to this plane of existence by the love of his favourite plane? Or has the belief in the ghost actually manifested a haunting that still persists to this day? Maybe it will only grow with time, but what do you all think? And whatever your theories, if you're ever in the area and can take the time for a visit to RAF Cosford and to Hangar 3, we would love to know what you make of the famous Avro Lincoln. We'd be fascinated to know whether you will hear any unexplained noises coming from the empty aircraft, or see any shadowy, ghostly feet. But now, we must return to our home county, and a very much more derelict and muddy airfield, on a bone-chilling December day, as we take one final visit of the year to head out to a very local and very haunted airfield that we had never explored before.
As I crossed the road to the small war memorial, the red poppies placed at its base provide a rather shocking splash of colour in this winter landscape of greys and browns. A sign dedicates this memorial to the 379th Bombardment Group of the United States 8th Air Force. Although this airfield was built in 1941, it didn't house any RAF troops until after the war was over. But in 1942, the B-17s of America's 91st Bomb Group arrived at the sparse airfield of Kimbolton, and it is one of those B-17s, just like the planes featured in the movie Memphis Belle, that forms the backdrop for a very strange haunting indeed. It wasn't until the end of the war, when the airfield moved into the service of the RAF, that the supernatural sightings began. And according to one young recruit posted there in 1945, in the years just after the war, it was the bleakness of the airfield that was partly to blame for the numerous odd reports. For young aircraftsman Ainsworth, and most of the other recruits, RAF Kimbolton was, by all accounts, a miserable place to be posted to for their primary training. He relates to author Bruce Halpenny in his book Ghost Stations that at the time of his posting, the site had only the most basic facilities of guardroom, mess, and sick quarters. There was no mail for the recruits to receive letters from their families, no naffy to purchase cigarettes, sweets, or beer, and to add insult to injury, no personnel were even allowed out to the surrounding villages. Unsurprisingly, morale tanked pretty quickly. Although the issue wasn't directly talked about by their superior officers, the young men were soon told that supper would be available in the airmen's mess in the evenings between 8 and 9 p.m. Something that was apparently quite a surprise, and they could only imagine was an action to try and somewhat alleviate the dreadful boredom of the long nights with no distractions or entertainment. The aircraftsmen were relieved to have something to break up the interminable evenings, but as the sight was quite dispersed, it did entail a long walk from the mess back to their barracks after 9 o'clock, a walk of around a mile that probably felt longer in the dark, especially to one pair of RAF recruits who spotted something very unsettling on their walk back to the billets. For there, right on the airfield, they saw what they would swear was the remains of a crashed B-17 bomber. That, in and of itself, was an impossibility, but to make things even stranger, it looked for all the world like a group of American airmen were sitting in the crashed aircraft playing cards.
Of course, everyone thought that the recruits were bored and had started making up ghost stories to entertain themselves. But that didn't stop another lone recruit seeing the exact same thing on the airfield on his way back from supper. Neither did it stop two more airmen from witnessing the inexplicable visage the following night. This pair stopped and stared at the bomber full of airmen playing cards until the vision suddenly vanished into thin air. The reports had been dismissed up until this point and largely ignored, but the last sighting disturbed one young man so badly that he ended up in sickbay. None of their commanding officers believed the story, and neither did the medical officer. The young recruits were given a verbal dressing down that came with threats that further claims of ghostly activity would be treated as a chargeable offence. And that might have been the last anyone heard of the strange haunting, were it not for the fact that the officer, who had just the day before refused to entertain any notion of paranormal happenings, himself ended up in sickbay. Why, you may ask? Well, because the very next evening after delivering his telling off and threats of dire consequences for anyone reporting any more ghosts, the officer stumbled upon the airfield's supernatural scene himself, and apparently his nerves couldn't take the sighting. From aircraftman Ainsworth's reports, it was difficult for us to pinpoint exactly where the sighting took place, but luckily the apparition didn't cease its appearances in 1945. In late 1981, a courting couple had an experience that must have at least temporarily killed the romance when they were out on the road that runs between Kimbolton and the next village of Stow Longer, at approximately where the modern road crosses the old runway. On that dark airfield, the couple saw, in what they describe as a hazy luminous glow, a group of American airmen playing cards in what looked like a crashed bomber. The bizarre scene lasted about 2 minutes, lit by what seemed to the couple like moonlight, although the night was dark, and then the image just disappeared. Understandably, the couple just got out of there pretty quickly.
Poring over my beloved maps, it quickly became clear that there was nowhere to park to visit the airfield, or indeed the memorial. We hoped we'd be able to park on the industrial estate, but when we got there, every entrance was gated and marked private, and the only roadside parking was a little pull-in on part of what used to be the airfield's perimeter track. But I had found a public footpath that crossed the haunted airfield, and I desperately wanted to go out there to see if I could witness the apparition of a crashed bomber for myself. We had deliberately gone at dusk in the hope that the descending darkness would give us a better shot at seeing the phantom plane and crew. Not feeling terribly certain of the slightly dodgy parking spot we'd found, Fitz stayed with the car, looking out across the airfield for anything unusual, whilst I walked along the airfield's old perimeter track before crossing the road to find the memorial. Now I scanned along the airfield and Perry track to locate the public footpath my OS map had promised me. But there was nothing. There was no footpath sign, no track to indicate a right-of-way, not even a telltale gap in the sparse brush where people picked up the path. Despite being certain I was in the right place, I wasn't about to go tramping over the neatly planted rows of brassicas populating the retired airfield that was now returned to farmland. So I crossed the road from the memorial back to the perimeter track and carried on following it. Technically, this wasn't a public right-of-way, but according to the map, it joined up with the missing footpath further into the old airfield, so I hoped that I could pick it up there. The wind howled across the lonely and open landscape, and I could soon see why it had been chosen for an airfield. You could see for miles across the flat landscape that unfolded uninterrupted before me. There was nothing and no one out here, it seemed, and the only features on the landscape were a piece of very rusty abandoned farm machinery, some stacked straw bales further off in the distance, and what looked like a bit of a dumping ground as I neared the top corner of the Perry track, a concreted area with a few more straw bales and numerous piles of rubble, possibly from the old airfield buildings. As I reached this point, I thought I heard footsteps slapping the broken concrete behind me, and I whirled around anxiously, fearing that a farmer was about to tell me I was trespassing. I wasn't technically on the public footpath after all. But there was nobody there, so I wrote it off as some weird echo of my own footsteps. Maybe the sound just carried strangely here. As I walked on, I heard a familiar drone overhead. It was the sound of a small, single-engined aircraft, probably an old one too. Perfectly real, though, and with a living and breathing pilot, I was sure, as it passed over me, a stark black silhouette in a sky flushed with the oranges and purples of a winter sunset. It may not have been in any way paranormal, but it was an incredibly atmospheric thing to hear, standing in the middle of that windswept airfield. I finally reached the spot where I should have been able to pick up the public footpath, but once again I was met with nothing. No signage, no track, no footprints, no gap through the crops, no indication at all that there was any public right-of-way. I stood there for a while, wondering what to do, and fished around in my coat pocket for the half slice of Christmas cake I'd slipped in there on my way out of the door. The square of greaseproof paper I had used to wrap up what was now mostly crumbs crackled and rustled so loudly as I tried to unwrap it with frozen fingers that it made me glance around like a wary animal, frightened of giving away my location. To what? I don't know. But the heavy silence of the place was unnerving me, along with the deepening darkness and my isolation on the old track. With no footpath to be found, I wasn't sure that there was much else I could do, and I was losing my nerve a bit by this point anyway, so I shoved the remains of cake back in my pocket and headed back towards the car. At the concreted area full of rubble, I paused to take a photo of the fading sunset, and as my icy hands fumbled with my camera, I heard the very distinct sound of a man cough behind me, almost like he was clearing his throat. Again, I thought that I was about to be asked to escort myself swiftly off the track. But again, there was no one for miles. The only people anywhere nearby were tucked up in the warmly lit buildings of the industrial estate, and Fitz, all the way back at the car. The sound came from much, much closer than either of those places. My footsteps quickened through the gathering dark as I hastened back to the car, ready for home now, for warmth and light and shelter from the fierce winds of the open landscape. "Did you find anything?" Fitz asked me as I let myself into the passenger seat. "I'm not sure," I replied, "but I certainly didn't find a footpath. Let's get out of here. I'm freezing." We left Kimbolton Airfield on the same road we'd come in, but this time with the old airstrip on our right. Darkness had fallen now, and I was looking out to my left at the memorial as we passed by, when Fitz said, "What are those lights?" "What lights?" I followed his gaze, and in the few seconds it took us to drive past the stretch of Perry track that I'd just walked, I saw two lights. Somewhere between the concreted area where I had first heard the footsteps and then the cough, and the point where I had ended my walk, having been unable to find the mythical footpath. As we passed, I registered that of the two large lights, which were far, far too big to be those of a car, one was a typical yellow colour, the other distinctly more orange, and the pair were about 20 feet apart. Confused, I ran through a mental highlight reel of what I had found up there. The lights had been just where I was standing only minutes ago, but there was nothing up there. The lump of rusted farm machinery definitely had nothing like lights on it, and may have harkened back to a time before such things were even used. Of course, vehicles could and must have used the track at some point to deposit the hay bales, but there had been nothing up there a minute ago, and I was certain that we would have seen, or at least heard, anything travelling along the track in the short time it took to get back to the car, pull a U-turn, and leave. So, what did we just see? Well, not a glowing B-17 full of card-playing airmen, disappointingly, but there was definitely something strange and mysterious about that stretch of the old airfield. I wondered about the lights all the way home through the fairy light-strung villages of our winter countryside. Once home, I'd put my phone down on a desk in the studio, and Fitz and I were poring over a map of RAF Kimbolton dating to 1945, trying to figure out what, if anything, would have been on the stretch of airfield where we saw the lights. As we were doing so, we heard an odd noise from behind us. It was my phone. Somehow, it had started playing a video clip I'd taken at the airfield. It was the one I'd filmed while I was standing at the concreted area where I heard the footsteps and later the cough, and then seen the lights. Of course, we pored over it, trying to listen to unexplained voices, but there was just the wind. We still don't have any idea how it just started playing that particular video all by itself, and for now at least, the ghosts of RAF Kimbolton will remain shrouded in mystery.
And that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of this Christmas special episode of Not Once VS, and also to the end of 2025. I think we're probably all rather glad to see the end of this year.
Wait, it's not quite the end yet. You forgot the crackers. We cannot finish the Christmas episode, or indeed the year, without our cheesy Christmas crackers.
You're very correct. We cannot.
Rustling commence. Okay, now, I do have a confession. These are the same box of crackers as last year, because we just never got around to using them. So, apologies in advance if the jokes are the same.
To be fair, we probably stand a better chance of not getting the same jokes. I'm hoping they wouldn't put the same ones in the same box. Thing.
Okay, true. Right, so you ready?
We'll see. 3.
Oh, yes. You got both of them.
I got both of them.
Dang it. Okay, you got to give me one though, because
Of course. Would I ever deny you a cracker?
No. Oh, I love the smell of cordite on a December evening.
So I've got
What should I
a
get?
red hat.
I've got a red hat too. Will it go over your headphones though? That's
No, it will not. I also have a pair of Rudolph paper spectacles.
Me too.
Oh, so we both got... There were different crackers as well, though.
Yeah, they were different, even different coloured crackers, but we've both got the same naff gift, if you can call it that. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get them to stay on my head.
I've got Rudolph ones and you've got Santa glasses.
Oh, okay. I have actually managed to get them to stay on my face. That's quite impressive. Wow. Right. What do snowmen wear on their heads?
I don't know. What do snowmen wear on their heads?
Ice caps.
Right. Okay. Sorry, that one took a little while to compute.
They all normally take a little while to compute. That's what makes it a Christmas cracker joke.
Okay, my terrible Christmas cracker joke. What is a parent's favourite Christmas carol?
A Silent Night.
Yes, well done. You didn't even need to think about that one.
You know what? These paper Santa glasses, I think, are staying on my face better than my actual glasses. Maybe I'll have to take these to the opticians and ask to get them lensed.
I must say, I'm not that impressed. I've had better Christmas cracker gifts.
Yeah, I've had worse Christmas cracker jokes, though. Do I get an extra point for getting the Christmas cracker joke as well as the quiz questions?
If you like. It's not exactly going to change the result, is it?
Right, that really is all from us now, dear listeners. Thank you so much for joining us for our cheesy Christmas cracker ending, as always.
And thank you for joining us this year, as well as sharing your spooky stories with us. We've loved hearing them and sharing them with you all. And don't forget that we're always in need of more true paranormal experiences. So if you have a story to share, then please do get in touch at knockOncefories.com. A huge thank you to our patrons and KOFY supporters, without whom we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Knock Once for Yes is produced by my production company, Narrative Audio. And if you have a podcast and would like to outsource your editing and post-production, then please do get in touch at narrativeaudio.com. We hope you enjoyed this special Christmas episode and that you'll follow the path of weird with us again next year for some more spooky stories and haunted history on the next Knock Once for Yes.
That's all from us, except to say, Merry Christmas!